Hey guys, how's it going? Kevin Cleary here with a knife video for you. And today we're taking a look at the Kizer Uprising. Okay, so this knife is, I guess I should point out, it is a Kizer design from in-house. The designer is Kim Ning, and this is available in a couple of different blade shapes. So you've got this one, and then you've got more of a standard, I think, clip point blade with a bit of a recurve. Now, for me, the Wharncliffe blade was definitely the way to go. I really enjoy larger Wharncliffe style blades. So, and you don't see a lot of them out there. So this one was pretty attractive to me, and I've been really enjoying it. This is a knife that has done a lot of things right. And let me just say up front, if you enjoy titanium frame locks, you are going to love this video. I have quite a number of comparisons, and all but 3 of them are titanium frame locks. So there'll be lots of comparable options here. But I will say this is definitely a pretty decent knife, and I've actually been very pleased with how it feels in hand, how it carries. And for a Kizer, there's some things that I kind of expect, and this knife has, let's say, exceeded expectations in a couple of areas. So let's go ahead and get started with size and weight. This knife is 8 1/4 inches overall. Now, this is an interesting knife in that regard because it looks and even feels in hand like a fairly large knife. But then when you measure it, it's only 8 1/4 inches. So that's about the same size as a Para 2. You'll see that in a second when we get to comparisons. But I don't know, for a guy who likes larger knives, this one feels like it's, big enough for me, but it's actually not that large. The blade length is 3 9/16, so just a hair over 3.5 inches. The handle length, and again, this is kind of interesting for a knife that feels larger than maybe it really is. The handle length is only 4 11/16, so just a little over 4 5/8 there. And the weight on this, and maybe this is why it feels, I don't know, bigger than it is or something, but the weight on this is 5.6 ounces. Now you can see it's fairly hefty chunks of titanium, reasonably thick blade stock there. So the weight is definitely easy to understand. And while we're talking about that, let's take a note that there is no internal milling. So in terms of how this carries, I've actually found it carries quite well. The clip goes in and out of pocket easily. It is single position. I know normally we talk about that under handle construction. And I don't love the look of the clip. It's not horrible, but it's definitely not my favorite feature of the knife. But in terms of how this carries, yeah, I don't have a problem with it. It's summertime right now, so you're wearing lots of shorts and lots of lighter clothes. And I've carried this quite often and really not had any issues with it. So I find it carries quite comfortably, but I know there'll be some of you out there who don't like anything over 5 inches or 5 ounces or 4.5 ounces or whatever. All right, so now we'll move on to the features. We've got the size and weight out of the way. You kind of know what you're getting into in terms of how much you're going to have to lug around in your pocket with this guy. Let's go ahead and start looking at some of the features, beginning the way that we always do with the blade. So what we have here is sort of a reverse tanto or, Wharncliffe-ish style blade, but it's got this nice full flat grind. Now what that means is this blade is a great slicer. It's really thin behind the edge. And so I've really enjoyed using this knife. It's a really nice blade that is absolutely designed to cut. S35 VN, thin edge geometry, stonewash finish. So yeah, I really have enjoyed this blade, and I think this is definitely one of the standout features of this knife to me. It's got a few things happening that you don't normally see. We've got this reverse tanto or this Wharncliffe style blade, which is nice and which is always a useful blade shape. But then you've got this really nice high flat grind, just a little bit of belly and a good edge geometry. And so those things come together to make this a really good performing blade. And of course, S35 VN is going to be really nice steel. And I find Kizer does a really good job with it. I know sometimes you'll hear, people talk about different companies heat treating S35 VN differently. My experience with Kizer has been quite good, so I really can't complain too much about that aspect of it. Is it like the very hardest, best possible? I'm not going to get into that too much, but it has been quite nice as far as my experience goes. So now that we've got the blade out of the way, and I will say I really enjoy this blade, let's work our way down the knife the way that we normally do, moving on to the pivot. Now I've got to say, again, I'm not a fan of Kizer's pivot. It's something I'm willing to overlook, but I really wish they would at the very least just go to a plain silver pivot. I feel like that would be a little bit more classy. Anyway, that's maybe a discussion for a different day, and it's not a problem with this knife, but with really all Kizers. Okay, so it is a bearing pivot. It is a titanium frame lock flipper. Okay, so all the stuff you'd expect with that. We've got stainless steel insert and over travel stop on this side. You should be able to see that near the end of my thumb. We've got a fairly well-designed flipper tab that works really good for either push button or light switch. And so if you're one of those guys that likes the option, you definitely get that. And the one thing that really stands out to me about this knife is the action. The detent is really, really nicely dialed in. So this is a good stiff action that really deploys with some authority. And that's something you don't often see from Kizer. So I really, really appreciate that they've got this detent just a little stiffer than usual. And I definitely am enjoying that. On the other side of it, it's also still a fairly nice knife in terms of the smoothness of the action. It's not the smoothest that I've felt. And Kizer sort of lands somewhere in the middle. You know, sometimes they're really good, but they're not up to par with, say, a Wee knife or a Riot. They're on par with the average ZTs, I would say. Every once in a while, you get a ZT that has exceptional action, and it's not maybe going to be quite as good as that, but it is going to be quite nice. All right. So the smoothness is good, the deployment is snappy, the detent is nicely set, the lock bar is good and accessible. And that's one of the things that I try to share with you guys. It's hard to, you know, one of the things that's really difficult to discern just from watching a video or looking at pictures of a knife is, you know, how hard is that lock bar to access and how stiffly has the lock bar tension been set. And this one is pretty nice. It's accessible. It's not difficult to unlock. It's not difficult to get your fingers down in there on that lock bar. So all of those things I think are really, really well done. And so that's my overall take on the action. It's good. It's not the most amazing action I've ever felt, but it's definitely not a problem whatsoever. Let's go ahead now and talk about the handle. And the handle here is the best feature and the worst feature. Okay, you know, the enjoyment still proceeds as we move down to the handle, and I really like the way this handle is designed. I like that thick, chunky hunks of titanium. It feels really, really great in hand. The jimping is just perfect. So all of those things are absolutely what we'd want to see. However, there is one issue, and it's right here at the tip of my thumb. So when they cut out this lock bar, instead of coming straight out the front the way that you normally see knives do it, let me give you a couple of examples here. So here's an example of how a lock bar gets cut out. Here, of course, is probably the most standard of all examples with the Inkosi. Normally that's how you do it, but every once in a while you'll see a knife that comes back down, and every time a company does that, it creates this little sort of sharp point right here. And you'll see that on just about every knife that has that kind of lock bar cutout. Now, here's where, you know, this becomes sort of an in-depth discussion. It doesn't bother everybody, okay? And so when they were testing this knife and when they were using it, they probably had no issues. And certainly I don't have any problem whatsoever. The way that I naturally grab this knife, I don't even think about it, okay? It's only when I stop and start looking at the knife and I see that and I go, oh yeah, this is one of those things, right? So in my particular case, and I have, you know, slightly, you know, I have size large hands. That's the size of glove I wear. And a large glove fits me fairly snugly. I can't go up to an extra large. It's too loose and I can't get anything done. But if your hands are about the size of mine, you'll probably be okay too. But I do know some people are going to have an issue with that little hook. And it really is just about your hand size and how your hand fits the knife. Some people, it's not going to be a problem at all. You know, for me, it's a perfect fit. It just feels so good in hand. And for me, this is a huge ergonomic winner. It feels really, really comfortable. However, there are going to be people out there, maybe with smaller hands than mine, who, you know, this knife is just not going to work as well. Okay, so that's my one ergonomic hit there, is that little hook. And as I say, it's going to affect different people in different ways. So now that we've covered pretty much everything in terms of the features and the construction of the knife, let's go ahead and get some other knives in here for comparisons, because, you know, one of the things we knife enthusiasts enjoy is titanium frame locks. So let's go ahead and check out a few. Here is the zero tolerance 0462, and I bring in a zero tolerance more, not that this knife is super similar to this, they really have a lot of differences. However, if you're talking about a titanium frame lock at around the $200 price point, you need to be thinking about ZT, and there are definitely some good competitors that ZT would be able to offer. Let's throw in a couple that are pretty common. I can't believe I failed to flip that knife open on camera. Of course I would. Spyderco Paramilitary 2, great knife, very, very familiar, and these are exactly the same size. So if you have an idea how big this knife is, you have a good idea how big this knife is. However, there's much more sort of real estate on the handle here. I didn't mention much about grip area. There's about 4 inches of grip area from here to sort of the end. And if you notice, my hand lands fully inside of these two, but if you had really large hands, there's still enough back here that you could put your pinky on it. I guess I should have mentioned that earlier on in the video. What else have we got to look at here? Let's throw in a Rat Model 1. Again, a knife that many of you will be familiar with, and even this will got to give you a good idea. If your hand fits a Rat Model 1, but you can see that it's significantly smaller here, so that should give you an idea as well. We haven't got to the other Kizers yet, but let's throw in the Recon 1 here. It's interesting. I feel like this knife is kind of in the same vein as the Recon 1. It's meant to be heavy duty and hard use and maybe a little bit tactical. But of course, it's quite a bit more money than a Recon 1. Now, let's see. I've got a couple of other Kizers here, and then I've got a couple of other overseas knives. Here is the Kizer Lancer 2, and these are actually fairly close in size. You can see you get about an extra ½ inch or so on the Uprising, and this is a very, very popular Kizer. Now, I wanted to bring this in for a different reason, and I've got one other Kizer that I'll bring in a second, but let me say this. I feel like Kizer's most interesting models are their collaborations. All right, so this is a collaboration with Laconico and another designer, and now I'm not going to come up with his name. Sorry about that. But you can see this is a beautiful knife. The design language is really there, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And Kizer does struggle, I think, a little bit in the design department. So I feel like they do exceptionally well, or they do their best work, I guess, when it comes to a collaborative effort with them and somebody else. Since we're talking about Kizers, let's bring in one of my favorite Kizers. This is the Kizer Milner. And, this knife was famously, wielded by Thor, the god of thunder. But now it's just sitting on my review table. So here's a knife that it actually is even a step above. The action deployment on this is just a little nicer than this. Both are very good though, and I'm quite happy with them. This one is going to be a little bit heavier. What else have we got? So let's move on from Kizer. Here is another Chinese brand. This is Riyadh. Of course, this is the Torrent. And you're going to get a little more refinement here on the Torrent. You're going to get a little more class, I would suggest. I find this to be just slightly more attractive, but still very similar in terms of size and weight and roll. Both of these are about 8 1/4 inches. I think this is maybe just a little more than that. Let's bring in, what else have we not brought in yet? Here is the Bestech Starfighter. Again, another overseas titanium frame lock. So I'm trying to bring in a few options that are going to be in a similar price point. And then finally, the standard of all standard titanium frame locks is going to be the Chris Reeve knives in Cosi. And of course, you could, this could be a 21 or a 25 or something else, but they're all quite similar in size. And so that should give you also an idea of what kind of size you're dealing with. The one thing I will say about the Inkosi, where it really shines, and the reason I bring this in as an example so often is because this is a really well-built, really heavy-duty knife, and it doesn't go crazy in terms of, it weighs a little less, it's a little slimmer in pocket, so you can still get a very strong, very heavily built knife without being crazy big and heavy. I know this one is a little on the heavy side at 5.6 ounces. But, it's definitely, falling into that sort of role of a heavy duty kind of confidence inspiring knife. Now, what are my overall thoughts on the Kizer Uprising? First of all, I have to say, I think this is one of my favorite in-house Kizer designs. I find it very attractive. It's interesting. I love the blade. One of the things that really drew me to this is I like larger knives, and so having the option of a Wharncliffe on a larger knife is, as I say, not something you always see. So I really, really appreciate that. I love the ergonomics on this, and I love the blade performance on this. It's a really, really great slicer. So overall, would I recommend this knife? Yes, with that one little sort of warning there about that possible issue in terms of ergonomics. Some of us are going to be fortunate and it's not going to, it doesn't touch my hand in any way and it feels perfectly comfortable no matter what I do with it. But some of you are going to have just the right hand size that it's going to be a real problem. So that's about the only big issue that I would say. Otherwise, I love the action. I love the blade shape. I love the construction. I love the look of this knife. Like every Kizer, I wish it didn't have that silly whirlpool on the pivot, but what can you do? So there you go. Hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to follow me over on Instagram. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And if this knife is available on Amazon, I will put the link down below. Sometimes newer stuff isn't on there yet. So if it's not, that's okay too. But also check out my Amazon store. You'll find a number of knives I've reviewed there as well. We'll talk to you soon.